This is the No Excuses Coaching Podcast with Ryan Montes and Alanna Banks, where we discuss the mindset, the attitude, and the strategies of elite coaching.
Okay, Alanna, hello. The other day, you told me a little story about something pivotal that happened in your life, and I think it will be very valuable for our listeners, and I think it will lead really nicely into what we're actually going to discuss on today's episode. So can you please tell us that story of that pivotal moment in your life?
Sure. I was just not in like the best place, you know. My fabric business was, I would say it was like coasting. Like I was just kind of coasting. I was doing the fabric thing. I wasn't feeling fulfilled. I wasn't feeling that great. And I went out. My dad was also very sick with cancer at the time. There was a lot of stuff going on in my life, I guess. And I was out for lunch with a friend of mine and I was complaining because that's where my mind would go. And, he stopped me kind of like dead in my tracks, not because he was annoyed with like what I was talking about, but he was just like, what are you thinking about? Like, what are you thinking about all the time? And that question really kind of made me stop and think, because I had never, first of all, no one had ever asked me that question. Second of all, I had never even considered what I was thinking. And I quickly realized that my mind was constantly in the negative, and my mind was constantly thinking about how bad everything was, how crazy things were with, me having to go back and forth with my dad, having the kids, my business wasn't fulfilling me. Like I was just like in this stew of negativity.
Yeah.
So it's no wonder I was feeling the way I was feeling. And so it was really quickly after that I was like, I'm not going to go here anymore. Like I can change the way I'm thinking. I can change what I'm doing. And I don't have to live in this victim story anymore, right? I can change that.
Yeah.
And so from there really started the, I guess, unraveling of my business that I sold last year. And then the journey into more personal development on my end, but also like getting into coaching and starting to take training and starting to change things to empower myself and get onto a path that was more fulfilling for me.
Okay. I want to zoom in on one moment in this story because it kind of went by pretty quick. And like when I really think about this series of events, there was this like one little moment, and I think it was like literally one question that your friend asked you that like radically changed the direction of your life. Now, obviously, there were many other factors at play. All credit goes to probably you for radically changing the direction of your life. But there was this one moment where like a pivot, I think, occurred in your mind, which preceded a pivot in actions in your life. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think so, but I'd love to hear what you think too.
Well, I think it was like, all that stuff was going on in your life, and that was real stuff, heavy duty, right?
Yeah.
Family stuff, your dad, your business was coasting or stagnating or whatever you would call it. The weight of the world was on you, so to speak, to use a metaphor.
Yeah.
And you're out at lunch with your friend. And I think it was, you were telling me this story recently. Your friend asked you a very pointed question.
Yeah. What are you thinking about?
What are you thinking about? And then, and obviously the context is very important. What are you thinking about? Can be a very benign question or a very important question. And then he said what when you answered?
Now I'm on the spot.
Now you're on the spot. Because maybe you don't even realize how important it was. Because when you told me the story, you paraphrased or quoted something that this person had said to you. And like, I was like, wow, that's awesome hypnotic language and awesome coaching language, actually. So the way I recall it was your friend said, when are you going to stop being the victim in your own story?
Yeah.
or something like
Yeah,
that.
I don't
Maybe you
think
remember better
the
than me.
word victim was there, but it was more like, when are you going to stop thinking these thoughts? I think is
Yeah.
really what happened. Because I remember being asked that question and being like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean? What am I thinking about all the time? That was my
Yeah.
initial reaction because I was kind of feeling defensive about it. And I didn't really understand the question
Yeah.
in that moment.
Consciously.
Yeah.
Consciously, right? So to me, that question is powerful when delivered in the right context and at the right time, because it has a very powerful subtext. When are you going to stop XYZ behavior implies that up until that moment, you were choosing
Yeah.
XYZ behavior, which is true,
Yeah.
which is true. So your friend indirectly, kind of triggered the understanding that up until that moment, you were choosing to hold on to keep the circumstances that you were unhappy with, right? But you can't just come out and tell somebody that because you'll be met with massive resistance,
Yeah.
right? So it was the context, the conversation, and the question that caused you to realize that you had more control. And this is my opinion based on how I've interpreted your story. You can tell me if I'm right or wrong, but it was that question that caused you to realize you have more control over your destiny, your life, your results, and your circumstances than you had previously believed. Is that true?
100%. Yeah. It wasn't like one of those moments where I was just like, "Oh my god, that's exactly it. That's exactly what I need to think in this moment." Right? It was very subconscious. So consciously, I was just like, "What kind of stupid question is that?" I met it with resistance and I was a little bit like, "What do you mean what am I thinking about right now?" Right? But then the ripple effect of that question really stuck with me. I want to say like days and weeks and years later, clearly, because I'm still talking about it. But that was the turning point for me recognizing that I do have choice. I can choose to be unhappy or I can choose to, make some changes, positive changes.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. And I'm here now.
Yeah.
So there we go.
There we go.
That's what
Okay,
can happen.
we got to the meat of it. And basically, I think what you chose, either at that moment unconsciously or soon after consciously, what you chose is to take control of your own life. And some people would use the term to stop being the victim and start being the hero in your
Yeah.
own journey. I personally would use the terms, you chose to stop being at effect and chose to be at cause
Hmm.
in your life. These are NLP and hypnotherapy terms, basically. But what they mean is a person who's at effect constantly feels that they're not in control of their circumstances and that, everything is outside of their control. They're just kind of going along with what's happening to them in their world. A person who is at cause, as you, Alanna, chose to be 4 years ago, accepts responsibility for what's happening around them and their circumstances and their results. And in doing so, accepts the reality that they have control.
Hmm.
Responsibility comes with control. You cannot be responsible for something that you do not control, and you are responsible for anything that you do control, right?
Yeah.
And when we take that responsibility, we take that control, we can change things for the better, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like basically right like at that day after that day that I really started to take ownership of everything that was happening, right? In my life. I was taking ownership of all of the little things that I used to kind of think, oh, this is happening to me. Instead, I'm thinking, okay, this is happening for me. How can I create this to be more in alignment with the kind of life I want to be living?
Yeah. I really like the word ownership, taking
Yeah,
ownership for what's happening
I love it.
in our lives, in our businesses, in our relationships. I actually, this summer, as Alanna, I was away on a personal development journey of my own. I took a couple of months away from business and away from life and away from most things to really deep dive. And I was working with coaches and I was working with trainers and doing a bunch of stuff. And there was one day where I was driving. I was in a foreign country. I was driving with some other people who were in a coaching program that I was in, and some guy was vocalizing his. I don't remember exactly what he was pissed off about, but he was complaining about something. And I was driving. I just kind of over my shoulder said, how can you take extreme ownership for that situation? And then like very quickly the topic of conversation changed and we didn't really get into a conversation about that. Days later, must have been a week or two later, a totally different person who happened to be in the car but not involved in that discussion came up to me and said, Ryan, I really need to thank you because that day when you said, how can you take extreme ownership for this thing that was unrelated to the guy who was now talking to me, he took that question and applied it to a problem that he himself was having. And he was like, how can I take extreme ownership about this thing that's bothering me? And it changed his behavior, and he decided to confront somebody about something that was important to him. And like he produced all these decisions and behaviors that he previously wouldn't have produced just because of that one question. How can you take extreme ownership? And that's another one of those powerful coaching questions that implies that, you, the person who's dealing with the situation, listener, Alanna, this dude from the summer who I'm describing, you have control.
Yeah.
Right? Only if you accept responsibility or ownership for, your behaviors in relation to whatever the situation is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy to forget sometimes, right? And I think it's easy sometimes to go to that mode, go into that victim mode, go into that blaming mode, because that could be your default, right? Like that could be your default response to things, like your subconscious. I think for me, I was living in the victim story like pretty much my whole life until I snapped out of it with that question. And that was just the way my life was. These things happen to me. This is the way it is.
I think that's kind of the regular average run of the mill thinking. Most people more or less, and it's context dependent, but more or less don't realize how much control they have over their circumstances. I think there's just something about the way human beings exist where we put responsibility and outside of ourselves, and we just tend to, in general, accept that's just the way it is. This is just the way things are. And we just allow things that we don't like to continue because that's the default, because that's easier, right?
It is easier. That's just what I was going to say. It's like when you do decide to take that ownership, you got to start putting the work in. You've got to decide. You have to make a decision. Okay, what do I want?
Yeah.
Right. And then how do I do that? How do I get there? It's easier to live on that autopilot sometimes, right?
Yeah.
The default.
What does it mean to be living in the victim story? Because I think that can be a very challenging phrase, right? Or people might hear living in the victim story and say, no, I'm not a victim. I'm not living in a victim story, when really they are, because the connotation of the word victim, I think, is uncomfortable for a lot of people. And I think maybe we can compare definitions, but for me, living at effect or living in the victim story or having an external locus of control in your life, these are different terms for similar concepts, just means believing that your destiny and your external reality are out of your control or somewhat out of your control, and therefore just surrendering to circumstance, rather than the flip side, the opposite, taking ownership, taking responsibility, being a cause, and accepting that you have massive control over your thoughts, behaviors, and results, and knowing that if you change those things, you will change your external reality.
Yeah. I think sometimes, I hate the word victim. It just like makes my skin crawl when I hear it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It is really uncomfortable. And I think a lot of the time it stems too from obviously your circumstances. Like you're like, well, this is where I grew up, or this is the family I've been born into, or, this is just the way things work for me. That's kind of what I think of when you're in that victim story, and really not recognizing that you you've created everything that are your results right now. And so that's another really kind of like powerful mind moment when, you know, you're recognizing that you've created this reality from this mindset. That can also be empowering, knowing that, okay, from this victim mindset, I've created this reality. So what if I morphed into a more victorious mindset? Then perhaps I could create something that is better. But then you run into like a lot of negative self-talk. You run into like a lot of subconscious programs that you have to work through, and that's uncomfortable, right? It makes you sweat a little bit.
It makes you sweat. And I think the thing that makes you sweat, or the thing that's even more uncomfortable than the connotation of the word victim, is the idea that if ultimately your current circumstances in life, your current results in life, your current external reality in life are the result of your decisions over the course of your life, 99%, obviously some things, you know, are outside, like what country you were born in, you didn't decide, right? We get all that.
Yeah.
But pretty much everything that happened after you came into conscious awareness that you are a living human being was directly influenced by the decisions you made. That means all the stuff that you don't like about your life, listeners, you know, this is where people have a hard time. That means all the stuff you don't like is also your responsibility, is the result of the decisions you've made and the behaviors you've produced, right? And you know, so people would say, and the obvious comeback, the obvious challenge is, well, why would I choose things that are uncomfortable for me, or why would I choose things that I didn't like? Why would I choose this, that? And nobody's saying, you know, that people are consciously choosing negative circumstances, or consciously choosing to, you know, be targeted for crimes, or consciously choosing, you know, bad lives or anything like that. But indirectly and unconsciously, it's the behaviors you produced and the decisions you've made over the course of your life that have produced, you know, the product, which is your current life. And it's a dead giveaway for somebody who's deep in the victim mindset when they refuse to accept that. When they say, no, 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 no. Society, my family, the world, the government, the terrorists, whoever dictated where I am in life right now, right?
Yeah.
And here's the thing, that can be true, right? There's a paradox in the way human minds operate, and that two competing and conflicting ideas can both be true at the same time. When we have the opportunity to this, now we're getting a little bit philosophical, but hopefully the listeners will stay with me, at least be open-minded enough to stay with me for a little bit. This is where you get to choose. And this is where a skilled coach will know this, an elite coach will know this. Your clients can believe that they're a victim of their circumstances, or they can believe that they're a hero in their own journey. And both could be true. One of them is going to give them the power to get the results that they want and change their lives for the better. One of them is going to keep them exactly where they are in victimhood, right?
And I think it's important to acknowledge that, yes, maybe this bad stuff did happen to you, right? Like, I don't think that we're, what's the word, dismissing, you know, we're not dismissing anything, but it's like the question that I like to ponder is, now what? Okay, all this stuff happened. You have this awareness now that you can create a different result with this more empowering, positive mindset. So now where do we go from here? Recognize what happened, maybe clear that up if that's required, so that you can move forward, but then really just focus on now what, right?
Yeah.
That's in the rear view mirror, right? That stuff that happened. There's no point dwelling in the past. So let's figure out what's next.
Yeah. Yeah. Precisely. You know, it happened, whatever it was. Now what? What's next?
Yeah.
Cool.
And for me, that lunch, that very pivotal moment for me, that's where I went, right? I was like, okay, perfect. I have this awareness now. Now what am I going to do about it? Right. Yeah. And I got more serious about like taking care of my dad. I got more serious about, okay, what am I doing with this fabric shop? I completely like kind of strategized things. I hired a coach. I thought about, okay, what do I want? So how does this, I guess, how could we like apply this to someone who's maybe starting out a coaching business and potentially feeling this way, might know about the victim victor mindsets, but still goes to that kind of victim mindset as they're building their business or as they're, delving into coaching?
Yeah. So there's two sides of the same coin. You need to get this concept of being at cause in your life, of being the hero in your own journey, the person who's in control of your destiny first. Whether, listeners, whether you are a coach or not, or you're just a personal development enthusiast, that this is a primary concern. You need to be at cause if you want to have control and if you're concerned with success and living a successful life and getting what you want in life, which probably you are if you're listening to this podcast. The other side of the same coin is if you are a coach or you are somebody who is leading others or assisting others or helping others or training others, you need to have already accepted being at cause in your life, having an internal locus of control. You might have heard this term before. And if you're leading or coaching or assisting others, it needs to be part of your process to guide others early on in your coaching process to come around to this way of thinking. Because if you have a client who's deep in the victim story or they're deeply at effect and they're putting responsibility and onus for their results outside of themselves, you will never be able to help them unless you change that first, or unless you begin the process of helping them change that first. You can throw all the fanciest, shiniest, most technologically advanced coaching models and methodologies at a person, but if that person is deeply at effect or deeply in their victim story, everything's going to bounce off of them. And it's going to be a waste of their money and your time and their time and both of your resources, because you're going to be spinning your wheels and getting nowhere. An elite coach knows this, and an elite coach addresses this before day one.
Yeah.
Right? Content, in messaging, in themselves, et cetera, et cetera.
I have this conversation with clients before we get on to our first session. It's like written in my contract that they sign before we get into it. Because if you want to have a successful business, you want to create results. And if you're working with victims, then you're not going to have results or good results, right?
Yeah.
And when you're starting out, this is really uncomfortable. At least it was for me. That was my experience. I think because I had a lot of empathy for people, or, I wasn't ready, possibly. Like I wasn't ready. And I remember specifically working with someone who just like, it didn't matter what I was doing, it wasn't happening. And part of the reason was because I hadn't made that extremely clear at the forefront, right? Or hadn't made it clear that we can't do this work if you're going to be in that story.
Yeah.
So I think that that's really, really important, and it's going to feel uncomfortable, and you have to just get over it. is like the bottom line. You have to get over it, and you have to start feeling comfortable talking to people about getting out of that victim story.
Yeah. And I do want to clarify again. I mean, when we say victim story, there's a very precise definition within coaching and personal development. This is not a blanket statement describing everybody who is a victim of, like a person who was a victim of crime or assaulted or something like that. We're not saying, they need to take responsibility and whatever, and, blame themselves or something like that. No. Victim in the sense of the coaching industry or the personal development field just means a person who's not yet taken responsibility for their current and future results, right? The past is the past, just to clarify. But yeah, you're right, Alanna. Like it's almost like I'm getting this image of a personal trainer in my mind, like somebody who teaches other people how to get really fit or build muscle. Like imagine the client comes in and and has never worked out before, and the personal trainer is saying like, okay, you got to lift these weights, et cetera, and the client is saying, well, no, you just lift the weights and I'll watch. Right. And then the client is expecting to get results. right?
Mm-hmm.
The client must take personal ownership of their results and actually do the work, lift the weights, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
But that's like a really kind of silly, but visually obvious example of somebody who's putting the onus for change outside of themselves.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I heard a really great metaphor for this actually at the HypnoThoughts conference that we were at this summer. And it was, and I've used it now with my clients because I love it, but it's like, I'm the DJ and you're the dancer in this relationship. I'll keep spinning the tracks if you keep dancing, and you keep dancing if I keep spinning the tracks. Like it's like the responsibility is on you to be doing the work. Like I'm here to support you. I'm here to spin the music, but you've got to dance in order to, get the results, right? And so for me, that's like the visual that I think about when I'm thinking about the relationship that I have with my clients.
That's a good metaphor. So in this metaphor, the coach is the DJ, the client is the person on the dance floor.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so if the client wants to have fun, they need to be on the dance floor and dance
And
to the
dance.
music, right? But if the client is at effect or deep in the victim story, they might be standing on the edge of the dance floor and just like, with their arms crossed, not willing to participate in the process, just saying, this dance floor wasn't made for me or something like I don't know what they would say. But yeah, I gotcha. Cool. Yeah. That's a good metaphor. I like it.
So what do you think about this episode? Have we got it, or is there more that we need to share with the listeners about?
I think we've got the message across, and I really appreciate you sharing your story there on the front end, because that I think illustrates, the point really well. We can move towards the end just by saying the concepts that we've discussed today, though slightly abstract, check out over and over and over and over. It's like literally, now that I've been in this industry for a few years and I've been in personal development for many years, almost 20 years now, it's very clear. It's very clear when somebody's taking responsibility for the results, and it's very clear when somebody is partially taking responsibility, and it's very clear when somebody is not taking responsibility for the results. And I see it with clients, and I see it with, when I say clients, I mean not necessarily just my clients. I see it with people who are clients of coaches, and I see it with coaches.
Yeah.
Right? There's the top 10% of people who are kicking butt. There's the middle 80% who have varying levels of success, and there's the bottom 10% who are just, not at all hitting the goals that they want to hit. And we could even divide it almost to those numbers. That top 10% is people who take extreme ownership for the results. The middle 80% are people who are, take some ownership but not total. And the people who are, lowest 10% in this industry who are doing the worst are likely, this is not an absolute, but likely the ones who are deep in the ad effect side of the equation. They're putting responsibility for the results outside of themselves. And we see this in different industries and in different areas and different contexts. It's ever present. Once you're aware of it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah. So what are some of those things? Off the top of my head, I can think of like people who are constantly using excuses, something that we don't like around here. Yeah. No excuses. People who are often blaming external factors, external people, external whatever. They're living in that blaming mode. People who are saying like, oh, I can't do that, right? I'm not a person that could do something like that. Like these are all kind of signs that you can pick up on that people are living in that sort of victim mindset.
Yeah. And I mean, if a person's just not getting the results that they want, the number one question or line of questioning should be around, what level of ownership they're taking for the results.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. One of the questions that I like to ask too is like, what's preventing you from getting blank when they're feeling kind of down in the dumps or they're not getting what they want? It's like, well, what's preventing you from getting the opposite of that?
Yeah. The word really actually can be powerful in this line of questioning. Assuming you have rapport with a client, the question could be, have you really done everything you possibly can to get the results that you want to get? Really? Because if a person's hiring a coach to help them get results, the answer must be no. Because if they could really have done everything that they could to get a result, they would have got the result. The
Yeah.
answer has to be no. So if they're speaking honestly and they're taking responsibility for the results, the answer is going to be no. And that's okay.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I think we have an episode coming up that goes deeper into this topic.
Oh,
So, yeah. So that's just
yeah.
a little teaser for what's to come this season, season 2.
We have a lot of cool stuff coming up.
Yeah, we
Like
do.
our episode roster is
It's very strong.
it's all killer, no filler, so to speak. Yeah, I've got it open on my screen here. Cool. I think that's good for today. I think,
Yeah, I
this
like it.
episode's going to be a thinker. Like, if this resonated with you listeners, and you can sense some wheels turning in your mind, you may want to go back and listen to it again one
Mhm.
more time, because there was some high level kind of metaphor built into our discussion there. Or take it, and if you are really at cause in your life and you take extreme ownership for your results, make sure you celebrate that and just make sure it's included as something that you're teaching to your clients.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Cool.
Yeah. And what do you have going on right now?
Yeah. So what have I got going on right now? You can follow me personally on Instagram at Ryan Montes NLP. Very soon, I'm going to be doing another intake of the Elite Coach Program, which is my flagship training course that includes NLP, hypnosis, everything that an elite coach needs to know and do with their clients. I also have a hypnosis only training coming up for coaches who want to add hypnosis to their roster, or for people who want to learn hypnotherapy. Both of those are starting soon. So find me on Instagram, message me for details at Ryan Montes NLP. What about you, Alanna? What's going on?
Yeah. So you can follow me at Alanna Banks Coaching on Instagram. And I'm taking on new clients right now for my one-on-one coaching program called Life Amplifier. It's really for people who are running on autopilot, wanting to make a change, maybe getting out of this victim mindset, and doing some deep dive into the subconscious with hypnosis and NLP. You will have a breakthrough. That's one of my guarantees, most of the time in the first session. So you can find out more about that by going to alannabanks.com or following me on Instagram at Alanna Banks Coaching.
Sweet.
All right. Well, that was the No Excuses Coaching Podcast with Ryan Montes and Alanna Banks. Follow us at It's the No Excuses Podcast on Instagram.
Yeah.
And comment on our stuff. Send us messages. We love hearing from you. And if you have any ideas, we do have quite a few amazing topics lined up for this season, but we're also open to suggestion.
Yeah. If there's something that, you think we have expertise on, and if it's around coaching or the unconscious mind, almost certainly we do, send us your topic ideas for episodes. And I think we did 2 or 3 last season that were ideas from listeners. So yeah, we might actually discuss it. That's it for this week.